The Texas night was dry as a blade. A naked woman pressed her forehead against the fence post of a lone cowboy's land. From the blanket smelling of horse grease to the tin box hiding a mace, every object pulled the whole valley into one question. Burn the papers to save the water, or keep the papers to save yourself? Stay and see. The wind followed the barbed wire fence, whistling through each thorn point, like someone dragging a fingernail across zinc. Dust clung to the boot's edge, the ground cracked like the lips of someone long thirsty. The moon hung low, silver-white, revealing a straight mark where the post was driven deep into the earth. Eli Rourke stopped at the gate, his hand on the top of the post. Familiar as touching a tamed animal, the smell of dry wood and old iron clung to his skin. The woman stood against the fence, naked, arms crossed over her chest, fingers pressing hard to hold herself still. Forehead against the wood, the white mark of a fingernail scored a thin line into the post. Her shoulders trembled evenly, like the rhythm of a broken machine, but made no sound. Her hair was wet, clumped, smelling of fresh moss mixed with ash. No plea, no name. Eli took the wool blanket from the mule's back, gave it a light shake to free the dust. Thick blanket, fibers bristling like small thorns, smell of horse grease, smell of old stove smoke. He laid it over her shoulders. She didn't flinch, didn't look, only tucked her chin in, wrapped the blanket's edge in her hand, the way one holds something borrowed, afraid to drop it. The tin cup on the porch step sat upside down, rim still damp. A leftover drop ran a thin line to the wood's edge, then stopped. The wooden door rested in its middle notch. The old latch sat exactly in the groove worn by years of hands. Eli didn't change the notch. He pushed the door with his elbow, leaving a gap the width of 2 fingers. She went in first, bare feet on hot brick. The skin of her soles flushed pink, cracked slightly at the heel's edge. The low chair was pulled close to the stove, one corner of its wood worn where someone's knee had leaned for years. She sat, held the blanket, eyes fixed on the sound of fire licking the oil stove walls. In the kitchen, the objects stayed where they belonged. The wooden ladle hung from a nail, the small knife lay crosswise on an old cloth, the chipped salt jar sat half a knuckle off the table's edge, as if someone measured the gap out of habit. Eli poured warm water into a cup, slightly cloudy from residue in the kettle. He set the cup in front of her, a finger's length away. She looked at the water first, not the man. Her finger touched the rim, colder than he expected. The wind shifted on the porch, slid through the door's middle notch, carrying the damp iron smell from the water trough. Could be someone shivering far away. Eli hung the saddle on the wood post, dry mud flaking off in pieces. He stood the rifle in the kitchen corner, the barrel touching an old scratch in the wall, making a dull knock, just loud enough for the unaccustomed to jump. She didn't. She lifted the cup, drank a short swallow, set it down. The rim left a thin water ring on the table. She turned the cup exactly a quarter turn, handle outward, favoring the left hand. Eli noticed. He touched his thumb to the table's edge at the salt jar's chip, as if recounting the order of quiet. "Name," Eli said, voice flat, no heavier than the stove's breath. She shook her head. Didn't say no, just shook it. Eyes didn't meet his. Her pupils moved over the kitchen objects in another order. The knife, the latch, the ashpan, the onion basket, the board bracing the table's wobble, the small wooden chest propping one leg, old with cross-grained lines. She paused there, longer than a breath. A faded bruise showed just under the blanket's edge at her rib. Purple turned pale, ringed thin in green. Not the mark of fresh rope, not the mark of a single bump against a table. It had folds. Her hand pulled the blanket up exactly 2 knuckles higher, covering it. The move was quick, learned. Her nose shifted as if catching the smell from the stove. Old oil mixed with damp ash. Straw smell still hanging somewhere in the roof. Iron smell. Eli opened the stove, pushed the wood deeper. The fire caught on a strip of black resin clinging to the door's edge. A hardened drip, stretched thin before breaking like a thread someone had pulled apart. He looked at it a second. Her eyes glanced at the same mark. They didn't say something was burned here. They didn't say, one night, someone stood here with resin on their hands. They let the fire eat the sentence. "Hungry?" Eli asked. She nodded once. Didn't reach. He took cold cornbread, split it, set it on the stove to warm. Fat from salted meat hissed on the cast-iron pan. The smell of salt rose slow. She followed the pan with her eyes, not her head. When he set the plate down, she touched its edge first, testing the heat. Ate slow. Bit from the middle of the bread first, not the edge. People who live on the street learn to eat the soft part first. The wind outside grew heavier. A faint sound out there like chain links straight into her eyes. She set the plate down, looked up quick, then back to the stove. "Yes." Her voice rasped from dryness, not fear. 3. She paused a beat. "Want what I hid." The words fell to the floor like a small, heavy thing, didn't break, just lay there. Eli's eyes went to the wooden chest under the table, then away. He wiped his hands on the old cloth apron, a habit when needing time to put things in the right drawer of the mind. His hand touched the door latch, checked the middle notch. Didn't change it. Outside, the barbed wire fence stayed quiet, but in the wind was another layer of scent mixed in, horsehide rubbing a cinch, the faint trace of cheap soap, wet hair matted with dust. These smells cling to ground longer than wind expects. The porch boards keep them the way paper keeps ink. She ate 2 more bites, stopped, broke a small piece of bread, tucked it into the blanket's fold. Not to run. Another habit, to save for after things break apart. Eli watched, didn't speak. He placed the small knife half a hand farther from her reach, but within his own. Not out of fear of her, out of fear of what followed her. "Bath's in there," Eli said. "Warm water, towel on the line, shirts in the second drawer." He pointed with his chin. She nodded, stood, blanket pulled tight, her movement neat enough that the wool made no sound against skin. She passed the table's edge. The table wobbled slightly at the corner, propped on the wooden chest. She paused, half a beat, nudged the table leg with her toe, pressed lightly. The table stood steady. A person who lives by objects will do that, fix the seat before sitting again. Eli's eyes followed the table's edge touching the chest. The table stayed quiet. In the bathroom, warm water tapped evenly into the tin basin. The smell of soap faded, the smell of moss. Eli stood on the kitchen porch, listening. The mule shifted its stance. The water ring where the cup had sat dried, leaving a dark circle like an old coin on the wood. He touched it with his finger. No moisture left, just color. He lifted the cup, rinsed it quick, hung it on a nail outside to dry. Water dripped through his shadow, stopped. He pushed the door open a bit more. The wind thinned, but the iron smell still hung. She came back, hair tied with a strip of torn cloth, blanket wrapped tighter. Eli's old shirt over the blanket, shoulders worn pale. She pulled the hem down, looked at her hands, at her nails. A broken nail lifted at one corner, showing an old dirt groove. She didn't hide it. She only rested her palm on the chair arm so the nail wouldn't scrape the wood. Eli fed more wood into the stove. The wood popped. A spark shot out, died before hitting the floor. He pulled a chair, sat like sand against a wall. Not dangerous yet, but the sound of someone who slept out in wind for too long. "Stay here tonight," Eli said. "Morning we'll see." He didn't add why, didn't add if. She nodded. A thick quiet. She looked around again. Her eyes didn't hide. They worked. Counting nails in the wall, counting the space from chair to door, counting the way out behind the stove. A narrow gap you could slip a shoulder through if needed. She passed by, laid her hand on the table's surface, gave it a light pull. The wood steadied. Her feet made no sound. Passing the wooden chest, the blanket's edge brushed the grain, making a thin rustle. She stopped, looked down, set her palm on the lid like someone laying a hand on their own forehead when fevered. Then drew it back. Didn't open. That was when the secret let out a part of its breath. She didn't say, "What I hid," but her hand had touched where it was. No one touches another's chest unless they know there's something under it worth holding in the mind. Eli saw, but didn't ask. A question kept will, way more when it's set down, and will be on time when there's a hard knock on wood. He set a small bowl of salt beside the bread, pushed it toward her with the back of his finger. She didn't reach. She pushed it back, the space between like a pedal that swings and stops. On the table, beside the chipped salt jar, lay a small triangular piece of leather, like cut from a saddle strap. It had been there a long time. She looked at the leather for a while, then shifted her eyes to the black resin mark on the doorframe. To most people, the two meant nothing together. To her, they could be the same sentence. On the porch, something light tapped the step. Not boots. Could be a dry branch, could be a stone rolling. Eli didn't go look. He set his hand on the table, beside the dried water ring, a broad hand, deep lines, short-cut nails. The middle finger bore the callus of someone long on the reins. This hand had taken the ground's pulse by touching the fence post's base, feeling the cool of a deep-running vein. She lifted the cup, drank the rest. The rim touched her teeth with a faint sound. She set the cup down, handle turned left as before. Eli's mouth pulled at one corner, not a smile, just muscle easing where it had been tight. He stood, opened the wood cabinet, took a thinner blanket, spread it in the corner opposite the stove. "Sleep there," he said. "Stays warm longer." She drew blanket and shirt around her, lay on her side, face to the wall, shoulder sinking into the cloth, chest rising low, hand tucked under her head like a hard pillow, eyes not fully shut. Checked the latch, still in the middle notch. No tighter, no looser. A habit of keeping the house in a state that could open in one beat and close in one. The middle notch was a way to breathe. Before sitting again, he picked up the triangular piece of leather, smelled the old saddle grease, set it back where it had been. She didn't look, but her eyes had marked it. He didn't look at her either. They let the objects speak for them. Blanket, cup, latch, chest, leather, resin mark. An insect circled the stove, wings hitting the iron edge, dropping near the chair leg. She lifted her hand, brushed it aside, out of her breath's way, like brushing aside a thought. Outside, the barbed wire fence still trembled faintly, like a fevered person, shivering after the sweat has gone. When everything in the kitchen was back where it belonged, Eli leaned against the porch post, looking out. The moon had climbed a bit. The fence post's shadow had drawn in, like someone pulling the rope tighter. No one stood there, but the ground still held the boot prints of 3 men from another night. Those marks didn't need to be seen to exist. He came back in, pulled the chair close to the stove, hand resting on his knee. Not to rest, to keep watch. She lay still, her breathing more even. On the pillow, a dry hair coiled thin as black thread. Eli looked at the wooden chest under the table leg. No reason to open it yet. But now, the kitchen was no longer just a place to keep food and fire. It kept a sentence unspoken. When opened, that sentence would smell of old paper or of metal. But tonight, it was only a smell hanging in the air, mixed with the smell of damp wool, grease, ash. He closed his eyes for a moment, without sleeping. The stove held its fire. The brick under the chair stayed warm. The latch's middle notch stayed quiet. The tin cup on the nail outside caught a thin moon slice through the door crack, laying on the kitchen wall, a pale line like a knife's test cut. That line didn't move, but it would only take someone passing to turn it. In the quiet, the secret lay open, just enough for a first night. She had no name. She knew the kitchen like her own after 2 sweeps of her eyes. She had touched the hiding place like touching a wound. And she hadn't asked to stay. She only put objects back where they belonged. In this land, the way you place things is sometimes the way you tell the truth. Eli opened his eyes, watched the fire draw back inside. On the table, the water ring where the tin cup had stood had dried completely, leaving the shape of a dark coin, a kind of currency of silence. He didn't touch it again. He left it still. Outside, the wind dragged once more along the fence, making the barbed wire quiver just slightly. By morning, that tremor would... The knock came. The unsaid sentence in the chest would have to come out by hand, not mouth. Here, people choose the hand first, words after. The tin cup warmed quickly in his hand, then cooled just as fast. Thin steam rose clung into a faint ring along the rim. Eli set it in front of her beside the table edge where the enamel had chipped. She looked into the water's surface as into a cloudy mirror, saw the stove's glow sway faintly. The blanket's edge lifted, the old bruise showed and vanished again into the wool. "Anyone following you?" His voice crossed the table without touching straight. She lifted the cup, drank a small swallow, drew her breath as if afraid the water might break. Set it down, turned the handle left. "Yes, 3. She swallowed hard. The dryness was in her throat, not in fear. "Want what I hid?" The words touched the wood like a weight placed with intention. Eli didn't ask what. His eyes went from the cup's rim to the small knife, then dropped to the table leg, where the wooden chest steadied the board. His thumb tapped once on the table edge, not a signal, just to hear the wood's density again. On the porch, wind slid through the middle latch, dragging the damp iron smell of the water trough in. The mule snorted, tail swept a strip of dust, the thin tie strap sounding. In the kitchen, the fire bit into the old black resin run at the stove door's edge, leaving a hardened thread. She looked at that thread, said nothing. Her bare foot pressed deeper into the hot brick, the skin of her heel flushing pink like sun-struck fruit. Eli stood, no hat. He went to the door, touched the latch. The middle notch was still there, like a habit of keeping the house half open to hear what was outside. He lifted the gap a little, not enough for a hand. The wind pushed harder. The knock came, 3 beats even, like someone counting an old debt. No hurry, no request to enter. Knock, then stillness. The kitchen seemed to draw in, like wood contracting in cold. Eli pulled the latch up to the high notch. The sound of iron slotting into dry wood caught once. On the door's surface, the old black resin had hardened into a line as thick as a bootlace. running from the hinge edge down like a fall frozen mid-drop. He laid his palm on it. It felt like touching a reminder not yet spent. He didn't open. He said one word to no one in particular. "Leave." Outside, boots touched the porch. Something set down on the step, the sound of metal meeting dull wood. Eli glanced through the crack just enough to see a rusted hook, its mouth gaping like a mean grin, set square with the step's groove. Whoever put it there knew this place used the step as a ledger. A voice drier than wind. "Return her." No name, no reason, just an order. Eli poured the cup in his hand out the door, warm water running a short trail on in. That act was the word go. He hung the cup on the nail, its mouth open to the sky. No more water for anyone else to drink here tonight. Inside, she stood. The blanket caught the chair's edge once. She freed it cleanly. Her eyes stayed on Eli's back, but her right hand slid under the table's edge, touched the wooden chest. Her forefinger traced along the grain, over a small dent the size of a fingernail, left by a nail head hiding under worn varnish. The finger stopped there, as if touching her own heated forehead. On the porch the voice came again, this time softened half a pitch, like practicing a sail. "Take her, nothing else." The sound of reins shifting, the light slide of spur against saddle leather. How far they stood from the step, Eli didn't need to see. He heard it in the way the wind carried their voices through the door crack. He stepped back half a pace, fitting his body to block the opening. This land doesn't return people. He didn't say why. Didn't say whose. A short laugh, without teeth. "She's wrapped in your blanket. That means she's yours." That voice dropped the line, like setting a trap made of words. Eli didn't touch the words. He only put the cup out like an empty shield, then let the last drops fall. The sound of water hitting dust didn't carry. But the dark damp on the step was an answer. The cup spun once on its nail, the rim catching a warped slice of moon. In the kitchen, she stepped back another half pace. The chest made a faint sound, like someone clearing their throat to ask to speak. She set her whole hand on the lid, didn't open, only pressed evenly to feel it, like a rider's hand on a horse's back before mounting, to see if it shivers. Her eyes passed the stove, stopped at the black resin mark on the stove door frame, then came back to the chest. Outside, silence. A hand tested the door, not to open, to weigh its strength. The high latch didn't shift. The wood didn't groan. The mule flicked an ear, answering for its owner. No one enters now. A figure's shadow drew back from the step. Boots turned, scuffing a short mark on hard dust. Then the sound of a horse's shake. The wind withdrew a little from the crack. The kitchen space stretched back a fraction. Eli dropped the latch to the middle notch. His hand left the metal, carrying the iron smell onto his skin. He turned back inside. Brace wasn't set in its groove. Ada pressed her fingertip to the chest's edge, pushed. The table stood steady. No one said, "Thank you." She exhaled, left hand sliding under the table, pulling the small latch on the chest's side. The wooden catch snapped with the sound of someone plucking a broken string. The lid opened just enough for a hand to slip in. Inside, no musty smell of cloth or paper. It held the dry metal scent, the faint tang of old leather straps. She brought out a flat tin box, all four edges evenly scratched, as if it had been slid into narrow gaps many times. A leather strap crossed it, the knot tied in a Smith style for greasy hands, secure but quick to undo. On the top, an embossed mace mark, half-pressed, from a seal dropped slightly askew. Firelight licked it, the raised ridge casting a slanted shadow across the stove's surface, like a stone set to block water. Ada placed the box on the table, one knuckle from the edge. Eli didn't touch it. He tilted his head just enough to see the knot, then sat upright again. She hooked her fingernail into the knot, the leather sliding through the box mouth with a short rasp, opened it. Inside lay the original water purchase deed, thick paper, cotton fibers exposed at torn edges, the county seal in black wax and lead at the corner, its edge so sharp a firm stroke could cut skin. The handwriting slanted, the steel nib leaving dark and light traces where the writer's sweat had bled into the ink. Numbers ran tight along the margin, as if to hide from a thief's glance. In the center, the survey of the northern vein, a scored line cutting across a ridge, slicing limestone. A road in ink that the paper's holder could turn into a real fence. Ada didn't read. She only held the edge between two fingers, enough to keep it from curling. Her eyes didn't brighten, they dimmed, like looking down a well. "Lock it," she said, one word dropping into the ink lines, then still. Eli stayed still. Every sound in the kitchen grew louder, oil seeping, the stovewood's soft pops, wind plucking the crack. On the table, the old ring from the tin cup darkened beside the wax seal. Two circles close together, one from what was already drunk, one from water rights, yet unused. He reached, but didn't touch the paper. His fingers traced the table's edge instead, touching the small, triangular scrap of leather that had been there since afternoon. The old saddle grease rose faintly. He set the leather at the paper's corner, 2 cents meeting, grease and wax. One living resin mark on the stove door, the rusted hook on the porch step, the off-center seal, the leather strap tied in haste. He looked at the print of letters on the bottom line, the name of a keeper of seals he'd once heard at the salt trade in town. The name carried a rumor of black market stamps. Wind shifted, blowing across the mouth of the cup on the porch, sounding a hollow note like breath across a bottle. Ada's shoulder twitched, not from fear, but memory. Her hand pressed on the box, pushing it toward him a short span, a gesture of giving something but keeping the decision. Her eyes neither asked nor surrendered. Outside, hoofbeats moved away, then seemed to arc back in a checking loop. Yard sand scraped against iron shoes. Something tapped the porch post, maybe a rain strap flicked by wind. The rusted hook still sat on the step, mouth gaping. Eli closed the box, the leather strap sliding with a short rasp, like a blade leaving its sheath. He set it on the chest, didn't put it away. The stove surface took back the empty space. He slid the door latch up 1 notch, then back to the middle. Habit kept the house ready to swing either way in one hand's beat. Ada pulled the blanket up, rubbed both arms as if dusting them, then stopped at the upper arm where the blanket thinned. Her gaze moved slowly, from box to cup, to the hook outside she couldn't see but knew was there. On her lips, not a smile, something else, harder to name. like tasting an unfamiliar flavor, one of lead. "You don't need to say more," Eli said, his eyes stopping at the bead of wax rolled to the seal's edge. "I've heard enough." She nodded once. In it was agreement and entrapment. She looked at the fence through the door crack. The barbed wire out there still trembled, but lighter now, like shivering after fever. Air drained from the kitchen by half. The stove eased its fire. She reached into the chest, brought out a small cloth pouch, old, mouth tied with black thread. She set it beside the box, didn't open it. Just left it as a stone to hold the paper from blowing. The thread was frayed enough that a hard pull would break it. She didn't pull. "I'm not telling you to keep it," she said, voice level. "Not telling you to burn it. I'm telling you, they'll be back." She didn't say who they were. But the hook on the step had already told. Eli pulled his chair an inch closer to the table. The wood gave a short creak, then steadied as the table leg pressed square on the chest. The things that had been trembling stopped, but beneath the floorboards a low note began. She repeated it, this time placing the name inside the kitchen, to leave it here in case she had to leave by another way. The wind eased for the moment. A horse at the gate circled, mane brushing the reins with a dry rustle. A short whistle, answered by spur against stone, then silence. The air inside the house expanded by exactly the space of a deep breath. Eli reached out, unhooked the tin cup from its nail, gave it a small shake. No drop left. He hung it back, mouth down. A small decision. Tonight the water was only for those inside. Ada tied the leather strap back around the box, her fingers steady, not shaking. When the knot lay in place, she turned the box so the mace seal faced the door. Not superstition, so that whoever stepped in first would see right away what would drive them mad. Eli cleared the space around the kitchen. Chair back half a length, pan close to the stove, knife drawn into reach, the leather scrap tucked under the paper's corner so the wind couldn't lift it. Everything spoke the same sentence, in objects. "We're waiting." The hoofbeats suddenly grew distant, as if someone had turned the horse's head away from the yard. The rusted hook still lay there, marking the place. Ada tilted her head, listening to the end of the silence. She dropped her shoulders one notch. Her eyes went back to the chest. Something inside her released. "Now you know why they want it," she said, not asking if he wanted to know. Eli didn't answer in words. He set his hand on the box, not to hold it, but to feel the weight of paper that could break a water vein. His other hand touched the doorpost, the worn groove of the middle notch. Two hands on two different forms of power, paper and wood. Between them was Ada, who had pulled the secret here and set it in the middle of the room, in a kitchen with a dry water ring, like a coin pressed into the wood. He withdrew his hand from the box, didn't look at her. "Finish eating," he said, voice flat. "Fire's down." Ada took the last piece of cornbread, split it, put half in the cloth pouch. She ate the other half slowly, her eyes resting on the box as if on a sleeping animal. At the blanket's edge, a thorn fiber still clung from the fence. She plucked it free, laid it on the stove's lip. It curled in the heat. A small mark, unnamed, but enough to prove by morning that this night had happened. Wind poured through the door crack, carrying the pitch-bitten taste as if someone had touched a drop before any other. A man who built fence along a vein was a man who knew water. She had chosen the porch post with his hand mark carved into it, not chance. Hoofbeats returned like loose rocks rolling downhill, more now, with rhythm. A short whistle, answered by rains shrieking on metal. Sand struck the porch post in dusty bursts, the air compressed. The tin cup on its nail trembled faintly, its mouth catching a warped slice of moonlight. Eli slid the latch up one notch, then dropped it back to the middle, keeping the house in a state to open or shut in one motion. He shifted the cast-iron pan close to the stove, drew the small knife into exact reach, set the tin box flat on the chest for stability. Ada pulled a thread from her cloth pouch, tying her hair tighter. Her other hand skimmed the pan's handle, testing weight. At the blanket's hem, a thorn fiber stuck out. She pulled it free, rolled it, placed it on the stove's edge, a habit of erasing traces. In the stove, sparks lifted in a brief path, then fell. On the porch, something heavy dragged over the ground, a barrel, hide, and stopped beside the step. No greeting, no 3 knocks like before. The wooden shoulder of the door felt the stance outside, pressed in, not waiting for leave. A shoulder slam. The door gave halfway under the middle notch. Then the hinges shuddered. An old screw screamed through dry wood. The old black resin on the frame split another thread. Outside and inside air mixed once, bringing the raw bite of unburnt oil. The first shape came through the gap like a blade, not large. The leader, eyes skimming the chest, not stopping, threw a rag onto the table. Ada's old blanket. Torn, damp, smelling of dried sweat and dock tar. It landed exactly over the dry ring from the tin cup, covering it, leaving a darker, fresh stain in its place. "The box," he said, his breath brushing the smell of oil. 2 others slipped in, splitting to corners. One drove toward the stove, one edged past the table. Boot soles knocked the brick, like counting. Ada didn't step back. She drove the pan's handle into the wrist of the one nearest the stove on an angle she didn't need to look for. The wrist popped from its intent. The knife fell, steel edge hitting floor like a flat bell. Blood spattered across the back of his hand, the salt smell rising a moment. The one beside the table lunged for the blanket on Ada's shoulders. Wool slid with a ripping hiss. Her shoulder came bare. Scar, faint as old rain marks on stone, no one had named it yet. She bit his hand, teeth hitting salt. Lifted. He lunged toward the doorpost, to the worn groove someone had hidden there before, as if by a trade's reflex. Eli rolled a burning length of rope down the step, his other hand pulling the man's body toward the table, tipping it on one side, a plate spinning before it broke. The tin box was knocked from the chest's edge by the man's elbow. It rolled across the wood, scraped a nail head. The shell gave a faint rasp. It fell to the floor and spun a short circle like a gambler's coin, then stopped at the porch edge. In the yard, a short hiss, then a small fire arrow, a cloth soaked in pitch tied to its head, slammed into the boards beside the window, fire crackling sharp, pitch smoke driving straight into the eyes. Another arrow hit the straw stacked near the pen, its first smoke writhing up like a black snake. Ada leapt, catching the box like catching a child slipping from a hand. She turned, her eyes meeting Eli's shadow for a beat. There was no plea on her face, only resolve. "Keep it." The words fell. She flung the box back toward Eli with her offhand so the leader wouldn't read it. The box drew a cold arc through the newly flaring fire, the mace seal's shadow striking the ceiling like a knock. That was the turn. From hiding in a stranger's house, Ada shifted to putting her life behind his back, trading her way out for keeping the thing out of a pursuer's hands. The line between guest and ally flipped in half a breath. Eli caught the box with both hands, felt the tin's cold pass through skin, clinging cold like lead. The leather strap struck his wrist, leaving a thin black streak like ink. He pulled the box into his chest, stepped back half a pace, shielded it with his shoulder. The leader lunged past, hand sliding across the table for leverage, blood from the back of his hand smearing a pale line on the wood. Ada drove the pan into his shin. Shin met iron, a dull sound. He staggered, long enough for Eli to shove him into the doorframe, where the middle-notch latch caught his ribs. His inhale clipped short, chest stalling. His head hit the old resin mark, knocking loose a chip that dropped onto his shoulder like a black raindrop. The third man had been in the kitchen corner from the start, not rushing. He'd been waiting for the box to drop. When Ada's throw denied him what he wanted, he snapped his knife up, blade sweeping sideways toward Eli's shirt seam. Ada blocked with her forearm, wool scraping steel, opening a thin line. Her hot blood meeting the cold blade sent the iron smell sharper than pitch. Outside, the straw truly caught. Firelight flashed through the crack, laying a red strip across the kitchen ceiling, making the embossed seal on the paper, still in the box, flare again in the mind. Power and burning crossing like two scissor blades cutting into the night. Hooves struck earth, rain screamed, the hook on the porch step tipped. Escape for someone who'd lost the reason to stay. The leader didn't quit. He spat something black, or pitch he'd held to smear arrowheads, eyes still measuring the space from Eli's chest to the box. "That box belongs to the county," he hissed, short and hard as a nail driven into bone. Eli didn't answer. He pressed the box harder into his chest with his bare hand, fingers printing into the mace's ridge. Pain threaded to the bone, clear. Ada breathed short. She tipped the chair so it fell into the leg of the man at the kitchen corner. His stance collapsing a notch, knife slipping, the cut line sliding through cloth. The old thorn in the wool bit into skin, a different pain, the kind that keeps you sharp and reminds you you're alive. A short pop came from the pen. Straw met oil. A board dropped a splinter. Black ash drifted in through the crack like blind salt dust. Eli caught the scent of dry ground under the ash, still remembering water. The cool scent lying still, like an animal under the table, waiting for its owner to call. For a beat's hitch, they all froze, as if in a still frame, the box on Eli's chest. The pan in Ada's hands, the hook skewed on the step, fire phone licking the frame's edge, resin dripping in beads. That stillness was heavy as a stone keeping a door from closing. Then choice. Ada stepped up, half a plank, slid aside to expose just enough of Eli's body for the leader to think he could reach in and grab the box. He reached. Eli struck his wrist with the box's edge. Tin cold on bone gave a hollow sound, pain waking in the marrow. He yelped, half a mouth, recoiling a step. Ada wedged the pan into the hinge of his thigh, twisted, joint pain locked him. He folded, eyes dropping long enough to see the resin chip roll like a charred bean. The third man broke his stillness, lunged. Ada raised her forearm to block, the earlier bite wound bleeding again, the brine rising. He stalled half a second at the scent. Half a second was enough. Eli switched hands, box still pinned to the chest. His other hand snatching the triangular leather scrap from the table, swiping it into the man's eye. Saddle grease smeared the iris, his head jerked back by reflex, blade veering off. On the porch, a pitch arrow struck the step again, fire eating into the old water stain from the tin cup. White steam lifting for a moment, then dying. Water was gone, only charred wood smell remained. The barbed wire at the fence hummed evenly, a dry sound like air pulled through teeth. "Keep," Ada repeated, this time not looking at Eli. She was watching the fire at the pen consume. Those two words lay crosswise in the room, blocking every other plan. The leader lifted his head, sweat sliding through dust, leaving a narrow, clean stripe on his cheek. He meant to signal outside to burn harder, but his eyes hit the flash of rage crossed his face, like wind snapping through a horse's mane. He lunged, driving his shoulder into Eli like a bull calf hitting a post. The post here was Eli's chest and the box. Bone met tin with a dull note, pain climbing into the ears. Eli held, but his breath shifted a notch. His chest rubbed the box's edge, skin stinging like wax pressed under it. Ada hooked her leg around his neck, yanking him sideways toward the stove. The pan slid on brick, base hitting the stove with a cold shriek. Fire licked the pan's edge, leaving a new black rim. The room's space forced itself smaller another notch. Every object moved half a hand's width. Chair tilting, plate broken, leather scrap fallen. Old blanket slumped under the table like a dead animal. Eli backed to the frame, turning the box so the lock ridge sat between his chest and arm, blocking every path away from him. On the porch step, the iron hook lay at an angle, mouth open like a cold smile. Outside, fire worked deeper into the straw, smoke lowering the pen's roof. Inside, a drop of sweat from Ada's temple fell, striking the box's ridge, breaking apart in silence. Here, the breaking point was no longer in wood or tin, it was in people. Ada had thrown her own way out toward Eli and stood without cover in front of him. Eli accepted the clinging cold weight of the box against his ribs, setting his shoulder as a wall for the object in place of a person. The turn happened not in words. It happened in the habit of putting things where they belong, the box to the yard, the knife to the floor, the hook to the step. A gust whipped through the crack, the fire at the pen flaring into a tall stripe. Throwing feral shadow into the room, the leader jerked his hand back, retreated half a step, not from fear, but to recheck his plan. He glanced through the window frame, signaled something with his chin. The fire arrows paused. The fire ate. The smoke spoke. Inside, Eli and Ada kept still. That stillness wasn't empty. It was full of smells, burning pitch, salty blood, sour sweat, cold tin, hot wood. Full of shapes. The mace ridge, the water ring, the resin stain, the iron hook. And full of sounds, horse teeth, chair joints, leather scraping, a knife rolling. The night didn't soften. It waited for the next faintly, steel tip-tapping brick to the rhythm of someone's still shaking hand. Ada adjusted the blanket, but the wool slid halfway. Her shoulder was bare. A fine scar ran slant across her collarbone, faded black beneath skin once burned. Not a whip mark, not a bite, a removed tattoo, the sunken strokes of a county mark, scraped out with the crude alkali everyone kept at home, ash and lye for soap-making. At the scar's edge, pale blue specks lingered like broken stars not yet gone. Eli looked, said nothing. His eyes went from the scar to the off-center mace pressed into the box. 2 marks in different places, saying the same descent. Ada swallowed dry. Her breath rubbed her chest like old papers brushing. "I kept the seal stock," she said, her eyes fixed on the dry wax bead at the box mouth, not on him. New hands came in, selling stamps. She bit her cheek. A tiny bead of blood rose to taste. "I broke the seals, took the papers. Not for me." The last line slid off slightly, like it had just fallen into her chest without a place to set. The moment clogged, not from guilt, from the price of dirtying your hands to keep water from those who buy rights. The leader had stopped moving. The smell of pitch tangled with sweat, sour and sharp. He squinted at the erased tattoo on her chest, long enough to know she was no longer something to hand back to the county like a seized item. He jerked his chin toward the door. On the porch, a man poured oil from a can onto straw. The oil, blacker than the night, slid over the yellow stalks like a snake, then soaked in. The fire waited at the stick's tip. Only one flick was needed. Eli lowered the box to the table. The table wobbled halfway from the chest, bracing it wrong. He pressed his knee into the table leg. It steadied. He opened the box. Leather strap slid over tin lip. A rasp held back. The lid lifted. The paper lay there, milk gray, cotton fibers jagged at the torn edge, the embossed mark sharp enough to feel in the eyes. The black script leaned, ink dark and pale with the signer's sweat. The blue-inked vein line ran exactly along his fence like a lethal confirmation. Rights could turn an ink trench into a real barrier. Eli's hand rested on the paper's edge without touching. He could see the whole refuge breaking down into a sum. Keep the paper, the ranch stays safe. The vein locked, the neighbors pass through. Every head of cattle would drink under the name in the corner. He could also see another fence, unseen, going up around his chest if he kept it. The tin's cold had already told him. "La seal." She looked to one side, letting him look to the other. Eli pinched the paper's edge. The weight of something thin. The emboss pressed lightly into his skin like small teeth. He let his breath out. The box hollowed by half. The metal sound thinner. He lifted the paper. His other hand opened the stove door. The heat poured out dry as August sand. Outside, the stick tip touched the rag once, a green tongue licking before it flared, the flame waving like it was tasting, biting into straw. The pitch reek went straight into the eyes, burning them. Eli fed the paper to the fire. The emboss melted like fat, from hard to soft to warped, black turning glossy, letters curling like insects drawing their legs in to die. The ink popped in tiny bursts with the sharp hiss of bubbles, the smell of lead. Wax and charring cotton fabric clung to the tongue and the eye corners. Pale ash lifted like a cloud of white gnats, touching the door frame, clinging in a streak. A full silence swallowed the wind for one beat. The leader looked through the crack, saw paper ash fly out, lick the step, cling to the rusted hook like someone scattering salt. His eyes changed. What was lost was not a person. It was the pretext to burn. He spat a short word into the dirt, whistled. In the yard, reins jerked, horses turned, hooves backed away. The man Ada had bitten before staggered over the threshold, one hand cupping a backhand, already leaking brown blood. Another man dragged him like hauling a wet sack. The leader stepped out last. As he crossed the step, he kicked the iron hook askew by an inch, its mouth tilting up like a brief smile, then lying down. A horse's tail slapped. The smell of burnt hair drifted. The pitch smell stayed. Straw flared once, then dropped, like someone had just shouted. The yard returned the night's normal sounds. Crickets, wind, sheet metal flexing with heat. Eli shut the stove door, turned the wick down a notch. The stove fire settled, yellower, thicker, like someone after a fit returning to breath. The paper was now ash, a black lump clumped to one corner of the stove, round, glossy, dense as a dud round. Ada stood still, eyes unblinking. The erased mark lay under wool, still aching from memory, not the wind. He threw 2 buckets of water over the steps and the patch of straw, still smoldering. Murky water drained along the grooves of the wooden steps, split into 2 slow-letting child. Eli stamped it out with his heel. Ash leapt to his ankle. Ada sat on the low chair, blanket pulled to her throat as when she'd first arrived. Her eyes followed the broken post, staring long as if counting every break in her life to make the tally right. Her shoulders lowered a notch, her breathing shallow. At the blanket's edge, an old thorn fiber still clung. She rolled it between thumb and forefinger, not pulling it free yet. Eli picked up the rusted iron hook from the step. It was heavier than it looked, rust eaten deep, resin caked in patches. He hung it on the porch post, just under the notch someone's blade had once tested. Metal gave a small, damp pop against wood, a sound seldom heard, but enough to stay. It swung lightly, a marker of the cost of burning and keeping. In the kitchen, a chair sat askew. Eli set it straight with the table's edge. He took the tin cup from the wall nail and set it mouth down on the table, instead of hanging it. A habit turned. Tonight, the water was no longer for inviting anyone, only for soaking in. A new ring printed into the wood, darker than the old. The 2 rings overlapped at the edge, not matching. Ada looked at the cup, then at the stove. She spoke very softly, as if to the cup's rim. "I leave, you sleep easy." No question, no offer. She laid the truth on the table, like setting down a bone just found. Eli brushed a shard of broken plate aside, set it next to the triangular leather scrap. He slid the chair out a beat, inviting her back to sit, without making the gesture. His voice went straight, without bend. "Stay or go, you choose." The last 4 words, like nails set into wood, straight, deep, few. Ada nodded, not right away, her eyes fixed on the black ash lump clinging to the stove's corner, a dud round of a right just killed. She lifted her hand to the blanket's edge, plucked a fine thorn fiber. The fiber was gray from dust, its point black from smoke. She laid it on the stove's rim, where the metal was just warm enough to bend it. It curled into a small loop and lay still. A mark, set light, not a word, that might still be there in the morning. Outside, the night widened after the people had left. Crickets sang again. The wind carried the smell of ash to the fence, mixing with the cool earth scent where the vein surfaced. A thin breath, like a hand laid on a forehead. The broken post would be set again in the morning. The wire would be joined with a single knot. The iron hook would still swing. The resin mark on the doorframe would have one more thread, and the black ash lump would cool until it became part of the wood. Eli sat, slow. The erased tattoo lay still under the wool, like an old map half scrubbed but with the main road still there. She didn't ask pardon, she didn't promise. She let the curled thorn on the stove's rim speak instead. Alive tonight, tomorrow her choice. In the stove, the wax bead from the seal had melted completely. The black ash lump stayed solid. The tin cup sat mouth down, still, water sweat soaking back into the wood, leaving a new ring. On the porch post, the rusted iron hook swung very lightly. No wind, just metal's habit of shifting a hair to remind, the price is paid. To go on or turn, your choice. Morning came wrapped in a pale gray sheet over the valley, like damp cotton laid across everything. The gate was ajar from the night, unlatched. Scattered hoofprints, 4 points pressed into dry ground like flowers, curved away from the ranch's edge and vanished in gray dust. Dry mud from last night's wagon wheels still clung to the step's edge. Fine ash lay scattered along the path, clinging to boot heels in a thin silver fringe. In the kitchen, the table still held the stove's warmth. On the wood surface, the embossed base from last night's seal had burned into the grain, a black bead round and sitting at the crossing of lines. Eli tried prying it with his thumbnail. It held. He tried the small knife. Scraping light, the blade raised a glint, then stuck. The bead didn't shift. He blew the dust away, laid the knife flat. No second try. The thing stayed like a blind eye on the table, looking at no one but seeing everything. The night's smoke had settled into a thin black stripe on the rafters. The pitch smell had faded. The charred wood smell still clung to his shirt. The cast iron pan stood on edge, its new black rim only halfway around. The tin cup lay mouth down on the table, leaving a new water ring, darker than the old. Eli turned the cup, hung it back on its wall nail, mouth up. One bead of water still clung, the size of a pinhead, not fallen. It held to the rim, catching a scrap of gray light from the window, still. On the porch, the rusted iron hook from last night hung on the post, rust deep red, black resin stuck to one corner. It swayed very lightly, though the morning had no wind. The tilt was only enough for someone close to notice, a small reminder in metal. The porch step, wet from last night's 2 water streams, had dried to pale marks trailing to the wood's edge. The mule chewed steadily, ears flicking flies. The pen's missing cornerboard had been wedged with a warped plank, a hurried nail bit halfway into the grain, its head still lifted. The black burned straw on the ground made a mark like an ink spill on cloth. The scorched smell still lay low, mixed with the damp, cool scent from the northern vein drifting through the gap in the broken fence. The singed posts old section salvage from a less damaged stretch. His hands wore soft leather gloves, the middle finger's callous a natural knot. He pulled the 2 wire ends together, looped once, jerked. A single knot, quick but firm. Both tails bent toward the wind so they wouldn't snag a passer's coat. He set his heel, leaned his weight into the post, the wire tightening with a small hiss. The knot sat clean on the pale gray face of the morning, like a period marking the loss. Ada stood inside the porch, blanket folded in her arms, no longer wrapped. The erased tattoo from last night lay still under the borrowed shirt of Eli's. The shoulder there was worn white where it had rubbed often. She set the blanket on the step, folded in half, edges straight, corners square to the grain of the wood. The edge of the wool was matted where smoke had clung. She smoothed it once. It didn't clean. She left it. Eli tightened the wire another notch at the second post. The sound of metal against wood was dull but soft. Sweat traced a salty line at his temple, dragging a faint shine through the fine ash clinging to his skin. He wiped it with the inside of his sleeve, leaving a clean streak as if drawn straight. Ada lifted the dirty skirt, the rag they'd thrown on the table last night, by 2 fingers, carried it into the yard, set it beside the ash heap, not burning it. She brushed the dust from the step like someone flicking a white sheet stained with ink. Her eyes passed over the hoofprints, counting without sound. The deeper marks at the front hooves, a heavy-headed horse. The spacing between the rosettes even, a skilled rider. She looked to where the tracks vanished in the dust, for a long while. In the kitchen, the round black bead on the table was unchanged. The gray light made it shine like a polished lead bullet. Ada glanced at it as she passed the table to set the cup back in the basin. She reached out with her little fingernail to touch the bead. Not to pry it up, just to recall its height above the wood. The feel on her finger was a cold, hard knot, neither in nor out. She drew her hand back without looking at Eli. Cattle lowed from the far pasture. A thin wind carried the smell of hide and dung to the porch, then left. The lead cow's bell tapped lightly against the bone of the morning, fell, swung, went quiet. Ada went to the wall nail where Eli's shirt from last night hung, its shoulder worn white like a brush tip. She touched the worn patch for a second. Rough. She didn't take the shirt down. She changed the angle it hung, turning the worn shoulder toward the wall so it showed less. A small act fitted into the order of the house. Eli lifted the post with the foot chopped through, replaced it with a dry one stored in the barn since the year before. The plank wood smelled of old grain, the grain running straight. He drove it into the old hole, wrapped. A single knot locked it. The hiss of wire eased to silence. Ada boiled a kettle, not much. Steam drifted thin from the dented spout. She poured a little into the tin cup hanging, letting no drop fall. The old drop slid down to meet the new, heavy enough to fall in a straight line through the air. The sound when it hit the empty cup's bottom was clear as a nail on glass. She hung the cup back, mouth up, leaving a wet streak running across its rim. Time passed by the way things dried. The wet mark on the step, the sweat at the temple, the fresh knot losing its glare, the ash cooling, smoke leaving only a thin scent clinging to the edge of the hanging towel. The earth under the new post softened to half a finger's depth, then hardened again. The sun stayed behind the clouds, the light still gray. Ada picked up the bent thorn fiber she'd left on the stove rim last night. It was cold, brittle. She flicked it into her hand, broke it in two, set both pieces into the small ash jar by the stove, as if burying something in its proper place. She went to the porch, stood looking at the hoof prints again. Her eyes were not red, not wet, only thin. Eli packed pliers, wire, hammer into the toolbox, set the box in the old paint mark's place on the shelf, exact. He moved the chair half a handspan, so his foot wouldn't touch the shard of plate. That piece still lay there, its edge sharp as a sentence left unfinished. He didn't pick it up, let it remind the foot not to forget. All morning, no long sentences. Only the sound of things set in place. Only eyes checking the wire knot, eyes glancing at the black bead on the table, then looking elsewhere. Eyes resting on the gate unlatched for one beat more. The silence wasn't empty. It held the things left behind from the night. Ada came to the step, bent to lift the folded blanket. She set it back exactly where it had been, edge parallel to the grain. Her hand slid over the blanket's corner, smoothed it once. She straightened, stood still. Her bare foot pressed into the old knot in the porch brick's crack. The same place as last night, a new habit in its first morning. She looked up at the new splice in the barbed wire, at the way the two ends gripped each other, not pretty, not smooth, but holding. Eli went to the gate, laid his hand on the latch. He didn't fasten it. He left it. The gate shivered slightly in a wind that wasn't there. Shivered because the wood wanted to return to its old place, not because of outside. He turned back to the porch, stopped under the iron hook. The hook swayed another hair, stopped. The sound of metal brushed through the thin air like a strand of hair. She didn't ask, stay or go. He didn't say, stay or go. Since last night, the sentence had lain on the table beside the bead that wouldn't come out. Morning only made it. The iron hook. Blurred to a short black line, she let go. The cup gave a very faint, hollow sound, then was still. Eli crossed the yard, bearing the scorched smell stuck to his skin. He broke a small, half-burned branch, threw it into the ash pit. The branch cracked dry. He lifted his head toward the northern hill. The sky there wasn't blue, but a faint, cold line still slid through the grass, the water vein moving like a secretive, stubborn animal. No one could lock it with ash. Ada stood at the threshold, her shadow falling on the step, just far enough to reach the black bead on the table, if shadows could touch. Her eyes moved along the porch post, where the hook hung, then stopped at the small knot on the barbed wire. She exhaled, laid a finger on her collarbone under the borrowed shirt, touched exactly the place of an old scar without pressing. Enough to know it was still there, not only on the skin, the morning thickened by a shade. The gate stayed open. The hoof prints ran to the edge of dust, then were gone. The black bead on the table stayed. The blanket on the step stayed. The single knot held the wire. The tin cup sat mouth up. The drop of water had not fallen. The rusted iron hook swayed very lightly, as if answering the unasked. Last night is past. Today waits for a different choice. In the end, only one round black bead remained on the table, the burned part of the embossed seal. It could not be pried loose, like an answer already chosen and beyond recall. On the porch, the rusted iron hook still swayed very lightly, though there was no wind this morning. And on the fence, the single knot still held the two ends of wire, hurried but sure. Ada carried the county's erased tattoo. Eli bore the cold burn of the tin cup on his chest. One had broken a seal to keep water from the hands of a man who'd bought the right. One had burned with his own hands what could have protected his ranch. The law lay on paper, but justice often lay in the ash. So what is the truer betrayal? Breaking the law to save the water vein, or betraying one's own interest to block a monopoly? The tin cup hung back in its place, mouth up, still holding one drop that had not fallen. Perhaps the answer is like that drop, poised between falling and not, waiting for each to decide which side it belongs to. What do you think?